Okay, well, for those of you who don't know, I'm Charlie Wilson and I have the restaurant Help Yourself, just around the corner, an organic restaurant. So thank you for all coming today and supporting the cause. And I'm just going to read a little something I wrote, maybe a little bit, telling you a bit about why I opened the restaurant and why I support real food. So last spring, before I opened the restaurant, I took a trip back home to England to visit my family. I remember sitting in the garden on an unusually warm and sunny afternoon drinking tea, as we do in England, with my grandmother, my great aunt, my parents, my brother, and my 2-year-old nephew, who was running around the garden with a brightly coloured packaged snack that he was chewing on. As I watched my nephew enjoying his treat, it struck me that there were 4 generations present that day, and how absurd it must be for my 85-year-old grandmother and 90-year-old great aunt to even imagine eating such a treat when they were 2 years old. So I began asking them about the food they ate when they were growing up. For starters, almost all food back then was naturally organic. They didn't spray large amounts of pesticides on the crops. Cows were not injected with growth hormones. Chickens were not given antibiotics. Animals were left to graze and roam naturally in the outdoors. Food was grown and eaten locally. You didn't eat apples from Chile back then. Most people actually grew some of their own vegetables, and all the meat and milk came from local farms. In fact, the majority of fresh food never travelled further than a few miles. Meals were made from scratch and eaten in moderation. Lunch seemed to be the biggest meal of the day. Meat was more of a condiment. Snacking was not the norm, and dieting was never heard of. My grandmother summed it up perfectly when she said, "We were brought up with a philosophy that you eat to live, not live to eat." So somewhere over the past 4 generations, we have forgotten how to eat. We have lost the ability to taste real food. In fact, most of us have forgotten or never knew what real food is. I asked a child the other day if he knew where the beef came from that was in his burger. His answer, of course, was McDonald's. We have simply lost the connection to our food. Food has become a substance that has to taste good to fill an empty void, and rarely is a second thought given to how, where it was grown, how it was manufactured, or what it's doing to our body. Now, 4 generations later, we are having to pay a premium to eat organic food. We have become a world obsessed with food and eating, a world where cancer, diabetes, heart disease, and obesity have become the norm. A world where many grandmothers are in better health than their grandchildren. I could go on and on about the reasons why this has happened, but thankfully there are many books and films out there now that talk in detail about what has happened to our food supply, so I urge everyone to do your own research. There is some very disturbing information out there. No matter what way you look at it, it is fairly obvious that something's not right. Just look at the US statistics. Currently, more than 64% of the adult population is overweight or obese. By 2010, over 50% of our children will be overweight. 1 in 3 people will develop cancer, and cancer is now the 2nd leading cause of death in the US. Number 1 is heart disease. 18.2 million Americans have diabetes, and nearly a third is unaware they have it. Just last weekend, I heard a disturbing story from someone right here in the Keys. A neighbour of a friend of theirs took their 3-year-old daughter to the doctor as she seemed to be growing breasts. After examining the girl, the parents were informed that unfortunately, the very early development of breasts was from the hormones in the chicken she had been eating during her 3-year lifespan. When you hear stories like this, you realise we have surely reached a crisis point. I'm not a doctor, and I'm certainly not a scientist, but plain common sense tells me that most of the food on the supermarket shelves is not real food anymore. If you stop to think about it, our bodies are actually remarkable machines. They carry us around through our daily activities for the whole of our lives. When pain occurs, or something stops functioning correctly, it's our body's way of telling us that something's not right. Our bodies have the innate ability to heal themselves with the right nourishment, and many diseases can be reversed and certainly prevented. The trouble in today's society is that every day we're continuously filling our bodies with more and more of the wrong fuel. And every day our bodies have to work overtime trying to process and eliminate these poisons so that eventually our body gives out and disease is formed. Or, if we are lucky enough to avoid disease, our bodies are so exhausted old age creeps up on us quicker than planned. By simply changing our choices, we can change the future of our food. So we made a mistake and learned a valuable lesson over the past 60 or 70 years. We learned that the industrialization of food doesn't work for us and it doesn't work for our planet. The question is, how much longer do we want to let that mistake go on? It's up to us, each of us, as individuals, to make the change. Let's give our children a healthy start in life. Let's nourish them with the right kind of food now, so they don't have to spend their adult life changing the bad habits they have developed. Let's have them growing up eating real food, so that perhaps one day they will look back as they're enjoying a lunch of freshly picked vegetables and say, "Wow, do you remember when Grandma used to eat that strange stuff that came out of a box?" One of the best lessons I heard recently came from a grandmother by the name of Joan Gussu. At 80 years old, Joan is a living example of what it means to eat local, organic, seasonal food that is predominantly homegrown, home-cooked, and eaten in moderation. Her lesson when it comes to food is simply trust nature, not science. And I think that's a pretty good lesson to start with. So thank you. I don't know who's next, Katrina.